ASUS really went all out with this ProArt Z890-Creator Wi-Fi. Thus, I think this board deserves a more in-depth look. So if you are a budding or professional creator, why should you buy this board? And how does this board compare to its previous generations? First thing, you should know that there are creative and professional features that you can only find on this board, such as the dual Ethernet ports and a COM port. Every ProArt board, starting with X570 for AMD and Z690 from Intel, has the standard 2.5G LAN as well as the bigger 10G LAN ports. This ProArt Z890 is also the same. The 2.5G is good for direct Ethernet, and the 10G is good for things such as a home server, a NAS, or if you want to connect to, for example, multiple 10 gig PoE switches. The COM header at the bottom here, well, I think works for an external COM port, which is used for debugging and a variety of industrial automation, and I think some medical imaging devices still make use of a COM port. Besides these two special features, there are still some magic features which I will get to later in the video. Okay, as this is a Z890 motherboard, you'll get your dual Thunderbolt 5 ports. These are Type-C 80 gig per second ports, and accompanying it is another Type-C port, but this is a Thunderbolt 4, which gives you 40 gig per second speeds. And that's not all. There are 6 Type-A 10 gig per second USB ports in teal, and one lowly USB 2.0 here. But there are actually more USB at the front. There's a standard USB Type-C 20 gig per second port here, and one USB 5 gig, and unfortunately only one USB 2.0 here. I think there's no more space remaining at the bottom because of the COM ports and a number of headers that you see at the bottom. That said, if you plan to use AIOs that require 2 USB ports such as the Tri-X Panorama 360, this will be an issue because an AIO like that requires 2 USB 2.0 ports. You'll need a USB 2.0 splitter for that, or you can use the cooler that's made for this board, which is the ASUS ProArt LC420. And going back to the back I/O, there's a display port in only and HDMI. I have mentioned the 2 LAN ports, the pair of attachments for your Wi-Fi 7 antenna, the BIOS flashback button, and light indicator to tell you that your BIOS is flashing. And you also have a line in as well as a mic out audio ports. And you may be wondering, how do I actually clear the CMOS on this board? Yes, you can, because there is a clear CMOS button at the bottom. I have to say, this board has a good weight to it. I think this is an 8-layer PCB, and because there are so many features on this board, like this bridge for the I/O area, it makes for a very good dumbbell. I like the curvature on this I/O area, which sits above the grill-like heat sinks on the chokes. I'm not sure if this is a design choice or the grills on this bridge actually help to remove the heat a lot better for the motherboard. But that said, this feature distinguishes this Creator board from other ProArt boards or other gaming boards in general. It gives a nice, sleek and professional look for a Creator board, which adds on to the almost all-black aesthetics on this motherboard. I think this is probably the cleanest ProArt board which I have seen so far. Compared to the previous Z790 ProArt, X670E ProArt, and the current gen X870E ProArt, this Z890 is mostly black, with some gold text and trimmings on specific areas on the board, such as the curved I/O bridge, the top M.2 heatsink, and the CPU area. The bottom M.2 area in particular is unique because I'm not sure if you can see it, the word ProArt is blended together. Why is this area so unique? Because it is unique. I'll show you why later. Following the black aesthetic, I have to commend ASUS for designing a nice curved piece for the top VRM heatsink, which also covers the main cooling piece for the VRMs. And there's actually one more cooling piece below the curved I/O bridge. I actually missed this, but I believe this provides additional cooling for the capacitors on the left of the CPU socket. Cooling the VRMs is important because a good amount of heat can be generated if you are to use a Core Ultra 9 285K inside this CPU socket. If you are buying a professional board of this tier, you should know that this socket only accepts the new Core Ultra CPUs such as the 245K, 265K, and the 285K. Intel's 14th Gen and similar LJ1700 CPUs will not work on this CPU socket, so do not try to force those CPUs inside this socket unless you want to have some bent or even damaged socket pins. I think Core Ultra CPUs do not run as hot as the previous 14th Gen CPUs, although Adequate cooling will still be required for this new generation of CPUs. Okay, talking about cooling, I have to mention this to get it off my chest. I honestly wish Intel and cooler manufacturers can come up with a better solution for the Intel backplate. It is slightly better right now, but I still think it is pretty flimsy and it can be difficult to mount the backplate as well as the cooler together at the same time. I know some cooler manufacturers put 3M tape on the backplate, but other brands which make use of this flimsy backplate do not. And from my experience, the mounting stubs from these backplates do pop out from time to time or from multiple usage. If you are a user who does not change coolers or CPUs very often, this will not be an issue to you. But for myself, who tests multiple coolers and multiple CPUs, this can be potentially a very big issue. Perhaps Intel can take a leaf of AMD motherboards where the backplate is permanently fixed to the motherboards. I know this may be difficult because there are different backplate designs, so I think this also boils down to the cooler manufacturers to eventually settle on one uniform backplate. That's pretty much it, thank you. And next to this CPU socket, there are the 4 standard RAM slots for 192 gigs of DDR5 RAM. If you are a professional creator and require all 192 gigs of RAM, you can do so with 4 sticks of 48 gigs each. I'm not sure if this new gen of CPUs can run all 192 gigs at max speeds of 9006 mega transfers per second. If you can, that's awesome, but if you can't, you still have to decide between RAM capacity or RAM speeds. If any of you tech people have any information about this, do write that in the comments below. And next, before we go on to the big main area, really big this one, let me just walk you through some of the other ports and headers which you may want to know. Starting on the left, we have the standard 2 8-pin EPS power to power the CPUs. I recommend that you plug in both of the CPU power to provide enough power headroom for something like the Core Ultra 9 285K. Next to them and the VRM heatsinks, you have the neatly arranged headers for the CPU fan, AIO pump, CPU fan optional, as well as the CPU over voltage jumper. Having an arrangement like this should make wire management for your air or CPU coolers a lot easier because you don't have to search around the board to know where all of these headers are. If you have an air cooler, you will use the CPU fan header, and if you have an AIO, you will most of the time use the CPU fan header as well as this AIO pump header. The CPU fan optional here in this case, I think can be useful if you plan to use push-pull AIOs. There will be 2 sets of 360mm fans, so you have to use both the CPU fan and CPU fan optional to power both sets of fans. But FYI, you will still need to have the main CPU fan header plugged in so that your PC can boot. As a professional creator board, I would actually like to see the diagnostic Q code on this motherboard because I think most creators, if they experience downtime or experience issues with this motherboard, they may want to have more information to rectify the issues on this board. But I guess we just have to make do with the 4Q LEDs on this motherboard to find out what's wrong with your system. Next, there are 3 ARGB headers on this board, one at the right and the other 2 are at the bottom. I guess you still need some form of ARGB on a professional board like this. Next, there's a standard 24-pin ATX power for the motherboard, and it comes with a corresponding LED which lights up if you did not plug in a 24-pin well or the board is not powered on properly. And wait, there's actually a fan header here, but I guess having a fan header here can be pretty useful. Let's say, for example, if you have a dual chamber case like the Lianli case, you can use this fan header for side mounted fans. Or if you plan to side mount your AIO, you can use this header for the front mounted fans. I am not sure if the fan headers for front mounted fans are long enough to reach this header, but I think this may work for a PC build like this. There's one more fan header in the center, which can be used often for your exhaust fan. Though you have to trace the wire lead in between the end of the heatsink and the I/O bridge to reach this fan header. There are also 3 more fan headers at the bottom, 2 of them on the left and 1 more on the right. These 3 will be useful if you plan to have fans on the bottom as intake. And as we go from the left to the right at the bottom, we start off with the front auto header, COM debug, TPM header at the top for discrete TPM device, temperature sensor, and the chassis intrusion headers. I am not sure what these LEDs represent. And you finish with the CMOS battery and the front panel headers. Alright, let's move on to the really big main area. These are really big heat sinks for your M.2 drives. The top M.2 slot, which runs at PCIe Gen 5 X4 speeds, uses the same heatsink style as the ROG Strix X870E-E. So how do you remove this heatsink? Very simple. Press the button and the heatsink just pops off. This is a very nice rigid heatsink. You see the same professional looking curved design on this heatsink with the same grill design as the VRM heatsinks. So one thing though, the curved area behind the heatsink can be quite a dust magnet. Just take note of that. So to install NVMe drives in this slot, just slide the SSD into the connector and pull back this slider to lock the SSD. Remember to remove the film from the bottom slot first before installing the SSD. You can see that there are 4 points where the slider can go. This means you can install the standard length SSDs, the shorter 2260 and 2240, as well as the longer 2210 here. Next, after you pop your SSD in, also remember to remove the film on the heatsink's thermal pads before reinstalling the heatsink. And with this button press, let's review more cool stuff. Because of the spring-loaded mechanism, there's quite a shake when you pop the button. And I'm not going to do any peel because I have to pass this board back to ASUS or pass it to another reviewer. Let's just keep the plastic film in to make the board look a lot cleaner. This entire heatsink opens up fully to more than 180 degrees, giving you full access to the rest of the M.2 slots. The hinge is pretty well done, the heatsink stays in place and does not feel flimsy. I think this is the first board from any ASUS lineup or any board manufacturer to have a heatsink like this. It saves you a lot of time and energy from having to screw in heatsinks or figure out which way the individual heatsinks go onto the board. Creators are very busy people, so it's good to know that you can just pop off this heatsink, install or remove an SSD and pop the heatsink back in. This black piece over here is probably the cover for the PCH. I'm not sure if it serves as a dual purpose heatsink, but it does look good and it provides a nice divider between the top PCIe slot and the middle M.2 slot. These 4 M.2 slots run at Gen 4 X4 speeds. You can install the shorter, standard length and the longer 2280 SSDs. Full length 2210 SSDs cannot go in these slots. But if you have a SATA SSD instead of an NVMe, you can use this 5th slot. However, if you are to use this 5th slot, you will not be able to use these PCIe slots. They share the same bandwidth, so you have to decide if you want to use the PCIe slot or if you want to use this 5th M.2 slot. Installing SSDs onto these 3 slots is also very simple. Like the top slot, slide your SSDs into the connector and press the SSD down. You probably have to push this locker tab back to lock the SSD into place. This 5th slot is slightly different. It uses the same locking mechanism as the heatsink, but the method is also the same. Just slide and press down until you hear a click. And when you're done, remember to remove the relevant thermal pad films and close the heatsink. And oh yes, there are 4 SATA ports on the right for 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch drives. Okay, if you like what you're seeing so far, do subscribe to my channel and click on the notification bell. So I have mentioned briefly about these PCIe slots. It runs at Gen 4 X16. I think for a creator board like this slot will be useful for a capture card, perhaps a sound card for better audio, or even a network card. You can probably install an ASUS Hyper M.2 X16 card, which allows you to have 4 more Gen 4 SSDs. But if you want to install the PCIe 5 version of this expansion card, you have to use the middle or top PCIe slots. These 2 slots here with the steel armor are your full-length PCIe Gen 5 X16 slots. They work in tandem, so if you are to use both at the same time, they run at half speeds 5.0 x8. Installing your graphics cards on the top slot will close off the middle X16 slot, but you'll still be able to use the bottom X4 slot, although you are limited to a Gen 4 Hyper M.2 expansion card. If you install your GPU on the middle slot, you will close off the bottom Gen 4 slot, but you can access the top PCIe slot. You can now put a Gen 5 Hyper M.2 expansion card in this top slot. But because, as I've said, both slots run in tandem, if you use both slots, they'll run at half speeds. Your Hyper M.2 Gen 5 on the top slot will now run at similar speeds when it's used on a Gen 4 X16 slot. Strix RTX 4080 is a 3.5 slot card, so your experience may vary if you want to use a slimmer card such as those cards that are 3 slots or even 2.5 slots thick. A quick interrupt here. This PCIe slot uses the same way to install and remove your graphics card. Very simple, as you have seen. If you want to install a card, just put it in. If you want to remove the card, just press down on the board, hold the card away from you and pull it out. I could be wrong about the placement of the PCIe products. I think for the sake of temperatures, because your graphics cards tend to have double or triple fans, it will be able to take in more cool fresh air from the bottom to cool the card as compared to the single fan that you find on the Hyper M.2 cards. Gen 5 drives do run hotter than Gen 4 drives, so having the Hyper M.2 on the top and the GPU in the middle could be better to not suffocate both PCIe components. That's it. There's a nice pocket of space between the two slots for hot air from both devices to escape from the motherboard and to escape from your entire system. Can you put two RTX 4080s or even two 4090s? Theoretically, yes, because you have two slots, but physically, I'm not very sure. Judging from the size of this ROG Strix card, I think you'll be very hard pressed to do so. If you really want to do so, it will be a lot better to use two blower GPUs. And another quick point to take note, do remember to close this big heatsink first before installing your graphics card. You will not be able to install the graphics card if the heatsink open because the heatsink will interfere with the I/O shield on the graphics card. They will just hit each other and there's basically no way to install the graphics card. This is a very nice professional looking board for a growing creator or a professional artist to use. Besides the looks, there are a few good reasons on why a board like this works. Number one, if you need two full-length PCI slots without having the need to spend so much more on, for example, a Z890 Hero, you can opt for this Z890 Creator. Two, this board, like every Z890 board out there, comes with two Thunderbolt 5 ports. I think creators are one of those few groups of people who can actually make use of these two Thunderbolt 5 ports for multiple devices such as multiple monitors or tablets for their work or design. But that's it. If you don't care for dual PCI slots and the two Thunderbolt 5 ports, but still want a lot of storage options, perhaps slightly more affordable options include the Z890-A or the tough Z890 Pro. I'm not sure if ASUS will launch a B860 Creator for the next cycle, but I think these boards will make these Creator motherboards a lot more affordable. That's it. As I mentioned earlier, I would have preferred to see two USB 2.0 ports as well as the Q diagnostic code LED on this motherboard. But ASUS gives you a COM port in return so that it can cater to more industrial and workplace applications. So if you like my review of this motherboard, do smash the like button and watch my review of the tough B860 Plus Wi-Fi to see how a B860 goes up against a Z890. And catch you in the next video.